Alrighty, welcome to another Secrets of Power card review. Getting towards the end of the set, we got 2 new leaders this week, which leaves only 2 more unrevealed. Bunch of new cards. Gonna break them all down, do a little bit of commentary. Let's get going, but before we do, please hit that subscribe button. Helps out the channel a lot. And if you're interested in some more content from me, do check out my Patreon as well. Alright, so I'm going to do a little bit of commentary here. Some first impressions on the set overall. I know I've kind of talked about it throughout some of these reviews, but what's going on with Aggro? I think it's getting a pretty big boost kind of across the board in this set. I wouldn't be surprised if the format might speed up. Plot inherently is a kind of aggressive mechanic because it's an action cheating mechanic that also synergizes with the most tempo positive play of the game, which is flipping your leader, right? Flipping your leader is a free thing to do that puts a giant unit into play, and now you not only get that giant unit, you get some secondary effects, sometimes which buff that giant unit with like upgrades, sometimes giving it an automatic attack, like we saw what Cinta can do in the last review. So a lot of powerful things you can do around the plot mechanic and aggressive decks. There's also just a lot of like aggro style cards that noticing are pretty good. Some new early drops, the new red pump aggressive negotiations, which I also covered in the last review. So you're going to see some aggro cards in this pile of new cards as well. And yeah, I think aggro is getting a lot of support. What about control? Not really. Like, control very little support. And I know it's been seeming, especially in the last few sets, that a lot of the focus on the design has been to kind of push the extremes more towards the middle. Not to get rid of aggro and control completely, but to make them less extreme on the polar ends. I think it's doing a pretty good job of that goal, getting rid of like the hard control style mechanics. That it's not a lot of support going on for those kinds of decks, although not zero. But the aggro extreme actually seems to be getting even more extreme with this set between plot and some of the cards. So that seems maybe a little imbalance between those two goals, or those two ends, right? The aggro and control ends. And lastly, pilots are getting boosted. That has a lot to do with plot as well. Cinta and pilots are inherently an aggro style leader. They're like all aggro leaders. There's nothing else really that I've seen been done successfully with pilots outside of hitting opponents' bases. So yeah, a lot of aggro. We'll take a look at the new cards today, which, you know, I always start with the new leaders if you haven't been here before. And then I go into the cards, and I go color by color, bundling some of the lesser cards so I don't have to spend as much time reviewing them. But let's take a look at the first new leader, Cababe. This is a Cunning Heroism leader. It's a 5 flip. Has a interesting triggered leader ability. It says when a friendly unit deals combat damage to a base, you may exhaust this leader. If you do, you look at the top 2 cards of the defending player's deck and you discard one of them. So one of your units hits their face. You get to peek at their top 2 and blow up one of them. Put it in the discard pile. Of course, doesn't mean they lose a card, right? They will just draw the next turn. When they draw 2, they will draw the next card in line. But you get to filter their draw step a little bit. And then, it flips into a 5, cost 3/6, raid 1. So it is understated. 4/6 is, and 3/7. We see those all over the place on 5 cost leaders. This is, let's call it a 3.5 power because it's a raid 1, right? She hits for 4. She doesn't defend for 4. But the ability is actually just, if you're familiar with the Vigilance card, it's basically that. When you deal combat damage to a base, you get to look at the player's hand, and you get to discard a card from it, and then if you do, they draw a card. So it's optional, and you get to, just like Vigilance is, and if you want to rip something out of their hand, you do. They still get the card back, just not that card necessarily. All right, my first impression on this leader is it's actually kind of an effect that I think is going to be overrated by a lot of people. The leader side especially, this is not offering you any sort of board advantage. It's very difficult to quantify exactly what the advantage is here. how many times per game will this trigger? How many times will you rip a card out off the top of the deck that will then be replaced by a worse card, right? Because it could actually be replaced by a better card. More on that in a moment. But it's very difficult to quantify, and like the value that this offers throughout the course of a game, how many times you expect this to trigger throughout the course of the game. It obviously lends itself into an aggressive build. Like, I don't think there's any way to not make this an aggro deck, because it only triggers when you attack your opponent's base. So yeah, like, who attacks opponent's bases? Aggro decks, basically. I think that will be the general direction. So what is the value of this ability? I think it's less than you might realize. You're drawing 2 cards a game. This is not like other card games where you draw 1 and you can really, really kind of lock people out of games just by, like, you know, blowing up the top card of the deck. The second element here, and the part that I think really makes this a lot worse, is that it's not optional. So it is optional that you may exhaust this leader when you deal damage to your base. You don't have to use this effect, but the moment you choose to do the effect, which means exhaust this leader and look at the top 2 cards of the player's deck, you have to discard one of those 2 cards. That is a huge, huge downside here, because there's going to be a non-zero. In fact, I would wager quite a large amount of the time where you wouldn't want to discard either. Because, you know, you're trying to brick very specific cards. Maybe you need them to never have Overwhelming Barrage or Super Laser Blast or like the next unit on curve or something. Whatever it may be, there's usually something that will mess you up the worst. But the moment you look at 2 and you don't see the card that will mess you up, you are now obligated to discard one of them. And which means you have now drawn your opponent 1 card closer to finding the answer. And that part of this design I really dislike. In fact, I think this was a huge miss making this mandatory. I think this leader would have been infinitely more interesting if you could just say no. You see the 2 cards, you're like, I'm good with that. Enjoy your next draw step and move on. That would have made this leader so much better, but that effect being mandatory is a huge miss in my opinion. I do not think it should have been designed this way, and I think it lowers the power level significantly. And the second thing, like I said, with the unit, it should have probably just been a 4/6. I think we need to stop with nerfing stats on leaders. It's the primary thing that makes them playable or not. And we see it over and over again that understated leaders have a really tough time breaking in, no matter what the effects they have are. Now, she does have a good effect. I will not dispute that on her unit side, being able to attack and rip cards out of your opponent's hand is powerful. That part is quite strong, but it, again, is not board affecting, and it's not actually resource affecting. It's just like pseudo value, and this whole leader concept is built around pseudo value that is very difficult to quantify, and I don't think it's actually that good overall. But you know, maybe this will prove to be so much more annoying than I'm giving it credit for, and we'll be able to do something with it. I'm not going to dismiss it completely. All right, the next leader for the week is Dryen Voss. He's a command villainy leader. Now, he is a 7 deploy leader with a pretty potent effect. So let's take a look. Action, exhaust, discard a card that costs 6 or more from your hand. Play a unit that costs 5 or less from your hand. It gains ambush for this phase. So an ambush granter on a leader, that's pretty powerful. And then he flips as a 5/7 overwhelm for 7. Significantly understated, I would say, for a 7 flip. But let's see what he does. Action, discard a card from your hand. So he still has this action, but now it's just play a unit from your hand. It gains ambush for this phase. So it's no longer restrictive to like what card you discard and what card you play. You can just discard a card to give anything in your hand ambush. All right. Ambush is obviously very strong. So this was designed, I think, to like make it pretty restrictive. So there's a lot going on here when you're going to build around a Dryen deck, because there's 2 halves to the restriction, especially on the leader side. You need a lot of expensive cards, 6 or more cost so that you can discard them. You actually need to be able to trigger ambush on some of your units. And then you need a bunch of cards that cost 5 or less that are good with ambush, which is a lot of cards. Granted, ambush is very powerful, but there's some that definitely excel with this more than others. And you need to also, on top of that, potentially find ways to manage your hand because you are discarding cards. But essentially, this ability says turn any 6 or more cost card in my hand into a timely intervention that costs 0. That's kind of what the text of this says. And timely intervention is a very good card, but we are aware of the issues with timely intervention, right? You don't play it from your hand very often, and when you do, it's usually like once a game because it 2-for-1s you. You have to spend a card to give something ambush. It also, though, costs a resource, and this is very different because it does not cost any resources to do it. But it has that extra layer of restriction where you can't do it on expensive cards, and you have to pitch expensive cards. There's a lot of like build around here. Ambush style decks, like this, you're going to need answers in probably both arenas. You can't just load up on all the best ground ambushers and then have nothing for space. So that's something you're going to need to consider. So you're going to probably want good space ambushers, good ground ambushers. You probably want them up and down the curve between 3, 4, and 5 cost, right? Because those are the turns that you're most likely going to use this. You need to manage your hand size, and you need expensive cards. Now, what are some good synergies? First of all, Palpatine's Return is a brilliant one, right? Like, you're going to play expensive cards. You're in green villain. Let's just throw our Vaders and Mauls, and if you're in other colors too, there's other big force units. Like in blue, you can throw Snokes and Dooku's, and in red, Palpatine, whatever it is. There's a lot. And then you can Palp Return on 6 costs, right? That's the turn where you can no longer ambush your units anymore, right? Because you can only ambush units that cost 5 or less. But bam, now you can cheat out one of the big ambushers anyway. So that is, I think, going to be a core piece to this puzzle. In various colors, you might need some draw engine. In blue, you get Dr. Pershing. In mono green, you get like Mazameda. I don't know if one card is going to be enough to kind of like undo a lot of this. One thing I think you can do with Dryden is just skip turn 1 a lot of the time. That will basically add an extra card to your hand. You're not playing something. And then bam, on turn 2, you just ambush their turn 1 play immediately. And then maybe you're just going to try to like ambush on curve for a couple turns. And yes, you'll go down in cards, but you maybe stay ahead on board if every unit that you ambush stays in play, right? They play something, you claim, you ambush it with like your 3-drop. You make sure your 3-drops can kill 2-drops with ambush, and then your 4-drop will try to kill their 3-drop, on and on. Another fantastic ambusher to give this ability to is Rook, right? He can kill any unit. He's a 5 cost. There's other good 5s as well, but he seems like one of the cleanest like automatic kill cards that you can play at 5, and that's great. It's still going to be, I think, sometimes a little finicky and a little clunky because you might not have the right ambush unit at the right time. You might not have the right expensive card at the right time. There's so many different like layers to this restriction that might make it difficult to build around. His unit side, the best cards on 7 resource usually already have ambush, which means when you flip him, using his effect doesn't actually seem that great most of the time. It's like the turn after, if you can like ambush like a reinforcement walker or like some of these 8-drops that seem really powerful. So he can certainly stay around for a couple turns. It's not like these 7 flip leaders get one shot all the time. Would have really liked the 8 point of health though on this leader. But overall, I think this is a pretty interesting one. We'll definitely try to build around this and see just kind of how this like ambush style up and down the curve deck works out, and if this ends up being too clunky or not. All right, let's get into Vigilance. Galen Erso is a 3/5 Vigilance heroism unit. He's got plot. When played, name a card. While this unit is in play, each non-leader card an opponent owns with that name, including those not in play, loses all abilities. So if you've played with Kira, there's a little bit of a similarity here. Like Kira blocks them from playing the card unless they pay more. Galen doesn't actually block anyone from playing the card. It just makes the card essentially be blank text. This includes events and whatever, right? their unit won't have ambush or sentinel, or their bamboozle is textless, right? The super laser blast does nothing, right? So in some cases it's better because Kira would tax the card, but if they could pay more than 3, they still get the full effect. Galen, on the other hand, has no real effect against units that don't care that much about their abilities, but most cards care in some way about their ability. And Galen makes essentially all units in your opponent's deck vanillas until they get rid of it. Well, not all units, the unit you pick, of course. Another interesting thing here, apparently shields and experience tokens are cards. Now, naming experience token doesn't like do anything once it's in play, but it won't get, I believe, sorry, the shield won't do anything once the unit has the shield, but if like a shield would come into play, it just will be a blank token, I believe. There's some like weird intricacies there. Not that I think you should ever name shield with this card or experience or whatever it may be, but it's something, right? This has plot 2, which is a pretty big upside, especially for like early flipping leaders. Like I would think even some 4 cost, maybe like Kazuda would love this card. You just flip it, name Bamboozle, and you can kind of protect your leader flip. This card's really interesting. There's like a range of outcomes here where it's better or worse than Kira, but Kira has been a pretty big staple in this game. So I would say I'd expect this card to be good in some variety. There's obviously like Bale, who can plot multiple times if you want to pair him with blue. But I also just like don't think you need to all sell out completely for this plot effect, because the card is very playable just out of hand. Next up is Condemn. This is a 3-cost Vigilance Villainy upgrade that gives +0/+0. So it's you're putting this on your enemies, but it says while attached unit is attacking, it gains. Now there's quotations around the first part of this and then not over the second part. So I'm going to skip the quotations. It gains blank and then loses all other abilities. So this, when your opponent attacks, it loses all its abilities, including its current on-attack abilities, because that's where the quotation here happens. And then it gains a new on-attack that says the defending player may disclose villainy in blue. If they do, this unit gets -6/-0 for this attack. So this is like, it reminds me a little bit of cards like Entrench, where it's like you put it on something and it can't attack anymore, kind of. The difference here, of course, is you can put this on a unit in an arena that you share a card with, right? Entrench, if you put it on like the space unit, and when you have no space units in play, and it like stops it from attacking. If you put it on a ground unit, it'll just gonna kill your stuff because it gets +3/+3. And Condemn, their unit just sits there. The moment it attacks, it becomes blank text and shrinks by 6 power if you disclose. Essentially can't really attack anymore while Condemn is in play. It can still be there in play, so if it has other effects on the game, it's not removing those effects, because this text doesn't remove anything until they attack. So Sentinel, for instance, will still be there. You know, it's okay. A little bit like Frozen and Carbonite, actually, like an upgrade that makes the opponent not be able to attack with something until they remove the upgrade. So we've seen precedent for this card style existing, getting some minimal play. I think Entrench specifically, because it's cheaper, has been like a big use case for decks that want to like skip an arena and just like play this somewhere. This is a card that like a hard control deck could just use, because essentially it is just hard removal, but you are setting yourself up if this gets removed by upgrade hate, especially upgrade hate that adds units into play, things like disabling Fangfighter. So I think it looks like an option. This looks like a situational card that may get some play. I don't think it's like amazing removal, but it's got some potential. All right, the rest of the blue here, we've got Vigil, another pretty bulky legendary. It's a 7 cost 5/9. It says if damage would be dealt to another friendly unit, prevent one of that damage. So it's kind of shielding all your other units with like a +1 prevention. And then as if damage would be dealt to this unit, deal that much damage +1 instead. Don't really know why that was necessary. It means this will die quicker if your opponent is like trying to like chip away at this, but mostly that line of text doesn't seem that relevant overall. It also has plot, but this is a 7 cost. There's not a lot of units that I think are waiting to plot with this. There's like Yoda. I don't think Yoda would want this. Maybe the Lando pilot would do this because like he would have like Sentinel, and then like this would sit behind him. Or if he jumps to the ground, of course, and doesn't pilot. I don't know. Like, this doesn't seem great to me. Diplomatic immunity is an upgrade that gives +2/+2. It says attached unit gains when this unit is attacked. You may disclose blue, hero. If you do, the attacker gets -2/-0 for this attack. Electro Staff exists for eternity. It's a +2/+2 that shrinks the opponent -1/-0 without the disclose. I don't think adding that extra layer of debuff with the extra cost of 4 symbols of disclose suddenly makes this card amazing. And then Wilro Hood is a 2-cost, a 3-cost 2/5. When he has 1 friendly upgrade on it, the upgrade can't be defeated. Great. I mean, it's not usually the upgrade that's that's at risk. It's usually just the unit getting removed, and then the upgrade goes with him. I don't think we're playing a 2/5 on that we want to like suit up with one thing. This seems, yeah, whatever. Next is First Light. This is the first of the new command cards. This was revealed along Dryen Voss. It's a 5/7 space ambusher. When this unit attacks and defeats a unit, you may draw a card and has plot. So yeah, it plots for the same cost as Dryden's flip. So like that's the idea. The issue is, I don't think this kills like the big things that you want it to kill in space on the 7 resource turn. I really wish this would have been just like a 7 or 6, even at least a 6 power unit. I don't want to spend my whole 7 resource turn flipping my leader and then like plotting this out to kill like a 2 or 3 drop. And that's really what it's killing in most games. It does, buy you back a card, which is nice for Dryden. It does plot, which means it doesn't cost a card, but I think it's just going to be too low impact overall. We got Kino Loy here. He's a 3-cost 1/5 that gets +1/+0 for each other exhausted friendly unit. So yeah, like in these go wide decks, maybe we're doing this. The thing is, you're playing him on turn 2, which means, if you're playing him on turn 2, it's not like he's going to get big early. So he seems like he fits more later once there's more units out, but he's a 3-drop. At that point, we probably want to do more impactful effects. One interesting thing I think about is like with Akbar, where you like self-exhaust your units to create another unit, which then actually buffs this by 2 power. I know that's interesting, but he is pretty weak when he starts off. I don't know if this will really work out that well. And then we've got some less exciting cards. We got a vanilla 6/5 for 5, but it is a Separatist official. So you guys should play this on turn 2 in Dooku because it's a Separatist if you want. There's Consular's Cruiser here. Is a 5-cost 4/5 Sentinel. Green decks don't really have access to a lot of good space units, especially if they're like mono green. So maybe there's a world. And Reconnaissance is a 2-cost event that says if you control a ground unit and a space unit, draw 2 cards. I really don't think 2-cost draw 2, if that's all it said, would even be that great. But when you keep adding tons of restrictions to them, it certainly becomes more difficult to justify playing them. All right, next we got some aggro cards. And here's Valiant Commando. He's a 3-cost aggression heroism unit. He's a 3/3 rebel trooper, so he has that rebel trait, which can be pretty important. When this unit deals combat damage to a base, you may defeat it and deal 3 damage to that base. So you can blow this up when it attacks base for an extra 3. That represents a lot of damage. It's, of course, understated. 3/3 for 3 is not where you want to be. It doesn't do anything when you play it the way, like, Fleet Lieutenant does, where it, like, gets the attack off. So it's, like, justified, even though it has those weak stats. Valiant Commando, I could see this being something you try because it's just representing so much damage, right? It's just kind of attacking twice once it hits base if you want to sacrifice it, and that's card disadvantage, but card disadvantage doesn't really matter when your opponent is dead. So an interesting little addition. We've got Kazuda. He's a 4 cost to 6 aggression heroism unit. He has Raid 2, and he says while you control fewer resources than an opponent, this unit gets +2/+0. So he already attacks for 4. He has a lot of health. He could potentially attack for 6 if you stop resourcing pretty early. So this represents a potential lot of damage. I think he's maybe a little weak when you actually play it, just because, first of all, he's a little easier to remove without taking casualties, right? Because he only has 2 health on the defense. But he is pretty resilient with 6 health, and he has this Raid 2 included, so he's going to hit for 4. And yeah, like, I think maybe we'll see some decks prop up that will just stop resourcing on 4 and have this attack for 6 the next turn. And even if you don't stop immediately, if it's good against ramp decks that will innately try to get above you in resources. So I think this looks like a solid card. Could be a role player in some aggro decks. I don't think it's like a slam dunk that it'll be all over the place, but I think it's got options. And next up, we have the Outer Rim Constable. And this is, this isn't a flashy card, but it's a 2-cost aggression 3/1 that says when played, you may defeat an upgrade. I think this is a very important card to have exist. Disabling Fangfighter exists right now. Is this better? In some cases, it's already better than Disabling Fangfighter, which is a card that sees some play. But Disabling Fangfighter was also going to rotate out in 4 or 5 months when Set 7 came out, and I was beginning to get worried we weren't going to get efficient upgrade removal, especially when I think pilot leaders are about to get huge boosts, especially post-rotation. So nice to see this guy come out. He has the official trait, which could matter in some cases. This is not a particularly interesting card. It's just, I think, an important one. We got the Strike Force X-Wing. It's a 4-cost heroism aggression card, 3/2 Rebel Vehicle Fighter. When played, you may deal 2 damage to a ready unit and it has plot. I don't think this card's amazing. I think it could just have be a role player in some situations. A card that comes in and deals 2, that has some fringe uses sometimes. It could finish off units. There's a couple places I would look to at least try this because it has the fighter trait. I think you could look at playing this with Luke. Luke often does chip away some damage at units just because of his ability. So there's a case where this just comes in and finish something off and then adds a fighter into play. It's definitely understated, so it's not necessarily going to be good enough, but it might be useful. And then the plot, I think that might come up a little more with Bale or Ghana. I think you can try playing this there as part of a toolbox for his plot in red. Just have a bunch of different kinds of things. Oh, this is going to kill something if I plot. Great. If not, it just doesn't. You just don't play it. Now, dealing 2 only to the ready unit is definitely, I think, a pretty big downside here because, especially if you don't have initiative, your opponent might just end up attacking with the unit that this would have killed, and then you just can't do anything with it. But overall, it's something I'm at least going to try to see how much it lines up. And if it doesn't line up really ever, cut it. All right, Oppression Bleeds Rebellion is a 3-cost event that says if a friendly unit was defeated while attacking this phase, draw 3 cards. I don't think the rate on this is actually that amazing. 3-cost draw 3 is above rate based on what we've seen. I don't know if 3-cost draw 3 would be completely broken if it just existed, but maybe it would be now. And there's a reason I included this on this list, and that's because of the card Aggressive Negotiations, the new red pump that deals +1 for every card in your hand. So there is some cases where you can chain these cards, right? Maybe you do something like Heroic Sacrifice. You draw a card with the Heroic Sac. You push a bunch of damage. You play this to draw 3 more cards. Next turn, you're up so many cards. Maybe Aggressive Negotiations is a +6 or something. That kind of situation. It also does appear to have at least a little bit of hinting at synergy with Luthen because he often wants his units to attack and die because then he gets to do his effect. And then here you get to refuel. It's a card that's at least worth checking out, I think, just because of some of the synergies that exist with, aggressive negotiations and maybe Luthen, stuff like that. Maybe also the Cassian leader, if we get one. There's 2 more leaders next week. We'll see. All right, and then, some less exciting stuff. Inner Rim Coalition. He's a 6/5 for 6. That says when defeated, you may ready a unit that costs 5 or less. It's a very expensive 6 cost that doesn't do much when you play it. We got Pursue the Lead. Choose a player. That player discards a card from their hand. If it costs 3 or less, create a spy token, and this costs 2. 2 costs, we get to usually pick what we want to discard from our opponent's hand. Here, they get to choose, and if they choose a cheap card, we make a spy. Yeah, I don't like this. And then we got One Way Out. It's a 1 cost pump in Heroism. It says attack with a unit. It gets +1/+0 and overwhelm for this attack. If it attacks a unit, the defender loses all abilities for this attack. I don't really see how important it is to make your opponent's units lose abilities when you attack them. There's not like a ton that have like defensive abilities. Of course, there are some like units that when you attack this, like, or when this is getting attacked, it gets grit, grit. This will be good against grit no matter what because it removes the grit. So maybe that was not a good example, but it's hard for me to even think of that many cards right now where like attacking into them to get rid of an ability is that impactful. And remember, like, you can't get through Sentinels because you already have to attack the unit before the Sentinel is gone. So, grit seems like an important one, but grit's not a hugely important mechanic. +1/+0 and overwhelm for 1 doesn't seem enough of a pump. So overall, I'm not super excited about One Way Out. All right, Cunning got some interesting cards in this reveal. So Garindin is the first. It's a 2-cost villainy one. It's a 1/3 underworld. So underworld continued getting a lot of support. When played, name a card, look at an opponent's hand, and discard a card with that name from it. So you have to guess at their hand, but if you hit, you get to rip that card out of their hand. So it's not like Bazine where they get to redraw. You just name, and if you succeed, you rip the card out. Interestingly, works well with Bazine because Bazine lets you look at the hand first. There's other cards that, of course, let you look at your opponent's hand. So it can work well with that. Or it can just be guesswork, right? You name the card that would mess you up. If it's not there, great. If it is there, you get to rip it out of the hand. And it also has plot, which I don't think is like the most impactful part about this whole card, but there would be situations where that, of course, is just upside. It's pure upside to have plot on this. It's not, will not complain that it exists there. I just think you're often going to play this without plot. Now, this synergizes with McClunky, where you can play it, bounce it, play it again. So if you know their hand and you can then do that and like destroy 2 cards out of their hand, that's absurd. This is going to be really good against control specifically. It also, of course, synergizes with Cad Bane, and Cad Bane was struggling into control heavily, especially with its more mid-range version. This having Underworld is huge for that. It can work well with the Cad Bane flip turn, right? If you just plot this out, it protects you from things like Power of the Dark Side when another cheap unit comes into play. Overall, it's a solid package here. It's a good card. It's interesting that we keep getting Underworld support set after set after set, but basically no other trait or tribal decks get enough support to exist. Underworld has really been the only pure tribal deck that gets a lot of play. And no, I don't even include Rebels. Rebel is not really a trait that's supported particularly well. It's like 2 cards in a Sabine deck that have Rebel relevance, or maybe 3, like Rebel Assault Fleet Lieutenant and Wing Leader. It's not really a Rebel deck. It's just like capitalizing on a few very powerful Rebel synergy cards. But Garindin and the Underworld stuff, yeah, just a lot of support for this trait. I hope we get some more support for other traits in the future. Stolen Starpath unit is a 1-cost upgrade in Heroism, +1/+1. Attached unit gains on attack, name a card. The defending player reveals their hand. For each card in their hand with that name, create a spy token. So, you're naming first. So the first time you do this, you might just whiff and you don't get the spy. But if you do hit, you, of course, get a lot of value out of this. And then if it stays around and you can start chaining some spies with this, seems pretty good. There are, of course, other ways, again, to look at people's hands. So you might not whiff with this at all. Overall, it's an interesting card. It, of course, has direct synergy with the Cababe leader, right? Because she looks at the top card of their deck when you deal damage to something, so you know at least one of the cards they're drawing next turn. So if it's not something they end up resourcing, then you'll be able to get your spy out of this attack. Yeah, it's an interesting card. I don't know how good it is though. We have Beguile. It's a trick, 3 cost. Look at an opponent's hand, then choose a non-leader unit that opponent controls that costs 6 or less and return it to its owner's hand. This is just worse Waylay. I do not think this will get any play while Waylay is around. I know it's a trick, so like maybe a CAD would include this with Jabba, but I still don't think so because Waylay's probably most important functionality for a lot of decks is that it can bounce giant units like Avengers for 3 resources, and this cannot hit 7 or 8 or 9 drops, etc. So it's a pretty substantial downgrade, even though you get to look at their hand first. Of course, that only is going to matter if you have some kind of synergies, and they exist. We just saw 2 cards that care if you know what's in your opponent's hand. So I actually do think Beguile is like an interesting, good card. It's definitely worse than Waylay. Wait 4 or 5 months, and then I think we start thinking about this card. I don't think we're replacing Waylay or even Spare the Target, which Heroism can play for 3 as well. This also can't target your own units, which I know is not the most important use case for Waylay, but it is a use case. And in fact, it is so much a use case that it's played over the Heroism specific Spare the Target that lets you claim bounties, because Heroism decks will prefer the off chance that they want to Waylay their own unit more than they care about Spare the Target's benefit. So Beguile is a nerfed version. Maybe Waylay was too good, and this will be happy that we can no longer have our giant units get bounced. But for now, stick to Waylay. Blue Ace is a fantastic card. This is a 4-cost Heroism vehicle, 4/5 ambush on attack ready and exhausted enemy unit. So 4/5 ambush for 4 in space is enormous, right? The previous card that was in this spot was Azutak Liberator Gunship. It was a 3/4. 4/5 in space is enormous. Ready and exhausted enemy unit, of course, can matter. Now, if your opponent has an exhausted space unit that you're going to ambush with Blue Ace, you just pick that. Otherwise, yes, there is a true downside to this effect, and we'll have to see how often that comes up. But I think the important part of this card isn't so much that you want to play it into decks that are attacking you on the ground. This is like your answer to other space decks, or if you are a space deck, it's like gonna help you win that space war. This is not a card that you play when you're the space deck and they're the ground deck, and you're not, and then you have to like ready their units when you attack with Blue Ace. That's not the purpose here, right? So think about ways, the game situations that this on attack is as unimportant as possible. And well, yeah, that's when there's actual space combat happening. And in those games, you're going to be happy you have Blue Ace. When you're not playing that kind of game, you'll be happy to resource this. But whether you are a space aggro deck that wants to play like all in space, or a deck that is just trying to have a few key cards to counter space aggro, Blue Ace fits that role, I think. It's also a fighter, so if you want to look at Luke Yellow, that's interesting to think about, because of course the ambush also will trigger Luke's ability immediately. But yeah, I think this is just, it's so overstated for 4. You just have to pick your situations where you're going to play this and know that it'll be effective, and yeah, you'll be happy to have it when those situations come up. All right, Faith in Your Friends, 2-cost Cunning Heroism, says search the top 3 cards of your deck for a card and draw it. Then you may disclose yellow, 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 hero, hero, if you do create 2 spy tokens. So if you meet this restriction, it's sort of like Yeah, I mean, it's just draw a card, create 2 spies for 2, which means you're not losing a card at all. You're just creating 2 spies, and you got to filter your deck a little bit. You can play this on turn 1 as well. So make 2 spies on turn 1 and don't go down a card. That could be pretty useful. Now, I need to stress how difficult this Disclose is. Been trying out Disclose with less restrictive cards, and it is not as easy to trigger as you might think. Even the cards that are like just reveal yellow, yellow, or reveal red, red, right? If you're not playing double aspected cards, right? We're talking non-mono yellow. In mono yellow, yes, this is mostly a free roll as long as you're playing a lot of heroism cards too. But if you're playing like dual colored, even just triggering like a yellow yellow means that you have to have 2 other cards in your hand that are yellow. Hands are usually 3 to 4 cards deep. So you need a lot of your hand to just match up. And then sometimes you want to play one of the yellow cards first, for instance, and then you can't do that and also disclose the one that needs the yellow cards in your hand. So there's the disclose mechanic is interesting, and it's more restrictive than it might look at first glance. It also means you have to like resource differently to make sure you keep the disclose on. You might have to even predict future draw steps because you're like, okay, I can disclose right now, but I don't want to do it this turn. I want to do it next turn, but what if I don't draw like a yellow card next turn and I resource one of my yellows this turn? So there's a lot of like finagling there. All of this to say is this restriction is largely not something you can do in a 2-color deck, I don't think. Now, if you're playing like a red-yellow deck, let's say Padme, and you have like 7 red cards in the deck, then maybe you can try to squeeze this in. But it is, even in a mono-yellow deck, this can be restrictive because it basically means first of all, your whole hand has to be yellow, mostly. And then like a couple of those yellow cards also have to be hero. Not too difficult, I don't think, to do in a completely mono yellow deck, but potentially very difficult to do in a 2-color deck. But the text is pretty powerful because you're creating 2 spies without losing a card. Now, the spies, they do get eaten up pretty easily, but you're getting 2 units into play. It helps you at least set up. It means almost certainly one of these units will be able to attack. That will trigger effects sometimes. This Disclose does trigger Padme's effect if you want. Having the tokens in play would definitely make Cababe get an attack off next turn, especially if you play this on turn 1, which means you'll get her ability. Yeah, like, this is very interesting, and maybe we'll get some more Disclose like this, where it almost is like a mono yellow card without being a mono yellow card. So maybe we'll see it with like blue or green or red to kind of like give a boost to an archetype without locking the card out completely from other decks. But yeah, pretty interesting. Sorry for rambling on that one. That definitely felt a little rambly. Anyway, Obi-Wan Kenobi. New legendary. He's a 4-cost 4/5 Cunning heroism. He's got Force Jedi Republic. When this unit deals combat damage to a base, discard a card from the defending player's deck. For this phase, you may play that card from their discard pile, ignoring its aspect penalties. So it's like reverse Ezra, where like you get to play the card from the top of your deck. This, you get to play the card from the top of their deck. Now, Ezra action sheets, right? You immediately get to play the card when Ezra deals the damage. This doesn't action cheat. And also, Ezra is an on-attack ability or when he completes the attack. This, which means he could attack units, and this has to go base. Having said all that, I actually don't think this card is very good. Playing a card from your opponent's deck is substantially worse than playing a card from your own deck, because decks are built around self-contained synergy. So how often are you ripping something that you actively want to play? I mean, maybe it's just like a unit and you just play it, you get some card advantage. But most of the time, I don't think this effect is going to be very good. 4/5 stats for 4 is just fine. I won't like be too mad about the stats. Would have liked 4/6 on this guy, and then I probably would be a little more excited just on the rate alone. But yeah, I think like potentially drawing a card from the top of your opponent's deck, if it's like the exact card you need to play that turn. That's like the other element here is even Ezra, a lot of the time we would like not play the card because there was something better in our hand to play. And that's when it's revealing cards from our own deck and action cheating. Here, like, you really need to be in like a situation where the only thing that matters is pure card advantage, because most of the time the card from the top of their deck will not be any better than a card that you play from your own hand. So you're kind of taking a downgrade in what you will play this turn only to get card advantage, right? Not have to spend a card. Is there ways to mess with this a little bit? I mean, let's say Cababe, if something else dealt damage, you can like, you stack what will be on top of your opponent's deck, and then Obi-Wan can hit. It's like, that's mostly like very fringe use case. I just mentioning it, but yeah, like, this is a cool card. I think it's like interesting, but in the end, I don't think this will be better than like the 4-drop heroism Cunning cards we've seen, like Kira and Ahsoka. It's like a lot of competition for that slot. And while his stats are better, his effect is substantially worse. So that's my take so far. And then some fillers. We got Soulless One. It's a 3/3 Cunning villainy ship. It's got Separatist Vehicle Fighter. On attack, you may disclose yellow villain if you do ready 2 resources. It's like a powerful effect. It's just not like how games play out, right? You don't usually like play cards and then attack, especially with your really weak statted units, right? This is understatted. My issue here, and with a lot of cards in general, is that their effects continue to come at the cost of stats too often. If Soulless One was just a 3/4, would it be broken? Absolutely not. It would still maybe not be better than other ships that we have. The problem is you have now given up that incredibly important point of health just to get this kind of middling ability. And that kind of makes this card bad. And we really need to just look at stats. Well, not we. I hope moving forward, stats get looked at as more something that just needs to be on the cards, not so much as like a lever that can constantly be pulled for effects. In some cases, yes, you can play understated units if the effect is large enough. Usually you need the power to come down, especially if it's a unit that needs to do something, because if you pull the health lever down on a unit that needs to survive in order to get its effect, then it's usually not going to get any play. And here, yeah, like you need to attack with this as your first action, but then you're not getting ready resources. If you want the ready resources, you have to play something and then hope you can attack with this. And yes, maybe that can happen sometimes, and you can cheat 2 resources, and then you get to play another card. Also, keep in mind, if you're playing something before this, it's making the disclose even more difficult, and this is not a cheap disclose. Yellow villain is pretty expensive disclose, and you're down a card because you just had to play something in order to exhaust any resources. So, yeah, if this was a 3/4, I'd be looking at this a little differently. As a 3/3, I'm not particularly impressed. General Grievous is another one that basically fits in this exact same conversation. Is a reason I started talking about this. So he's a 3/3 for 2 in Villain Cunning. He is hidden, and he says when this unit is attacked, return him to his owner's hand. So if they attack Grievous, he runs away, jumps back into your hand. That's a downside. I know there's some weird cases where you can think of ways that this is not a downside. I promise you this is a downside, because if you pay 2 resources for a card and your opponent puts it back into your hand, you have just wasted 2 resources. It doesn't matter how cool it was while it was happening, and it usually doesn't even matter if this got 1 attack off, which it can get because it's hidden. It is not a tempo positive play to get your cards returned to hand for no resources. You don't like your cards getting waylaid for 0, and that's what General Grievous does. I think a lot of things could have solved this, though. He could have been higher statted, right? 3/3 Textless is a card. It's called Battlefield Marine. It's not a broken card. 3/3, there's a new 3/3 in red, the Mandalorian card. it has like a tiny downside that's like you disclose red or you take 2 damage, which is actually an upside in like a Padme deck. But like that downside is so negligible that you basically just created another 3/3 that any red deck can play. Grievous should have had something else going for it, I think, to make this worth it. And other like as I see it, it's probably not going to be great. If you want to play this, maybe it's in Grand Inquisitor yellow because you can attack with it turn 1. Then it's a 3/1, and if your opponent attacks it, it goes back into your hand. But again, that's not great. You just spent 2 resources and actions to deal 3 to your opponent's base, and you can't keep doing that or you'll never have a board, and then you will lose because you don't have a board, you don't have any tempo. So that's my take on Soulless One and Grievous. I just think their stats are not pushed enough to make their effects good, right? Soulless One is different, right? It's an upside effect. The stats got nerfed. Grievous is a downside effect. I don't think the stats got buffed enough. All right, Implicate is a 2-cost trick. Choose a unit for this phase. It gains Sentinel, and when this unit is attacked, create a spy token. There's like infinite cards that grant Sentinel to units, whether they're events or upgrades. None of them are any good. This is another one that isn't any good. If your opponent can one-shot it, they just will, and you can get your spy token for 2 resources. If they can't, they probably just won't attack it, so you just wasted a card. We just haven't seen this effect, which has been all over the place, ever be particularly useful. And then we have Lurking Snub Fighter. It's a 3-cost Cunning Villainy ship, 2/3 underworld vehicle fighter. When played, you may exhaust a unit and has plot. So you can think it's the same stats as Cartel Spacer and has underworld as well, but you're paying an extra 1 to make the restriction simpler, right? You don't have to exhaust a unit that has 4 or less, and you don't have to have a Cunning unit in play. You play this and you exhaust something, and it has plot. It's not terrible. Specifically because it also has the underworld trait. I don't think it's quite good enough, but it's not terrible. All right, the couple cards in Villainy and Heroism. We got Contempt for Culture. Deal 2 damage to a non-vehicle unit and create a spy token for 2. 2 damage is usually just not enough, even with this little upside, but it's not a terrible card. And then we've got Remote Escort Tank. It's a 6-cost 5/5 vehicle. In Heroism, when played, give a unit Sentinel for this phase, and it has plot. So, are there 6-flip units 6-flip leaders that you want to just flip, bring this tank out, give itself Sentinel, maybe give the leader Sentinel, something like that? Probably not. The rate here is not good enough, even with the plot. It might be a pretty good limited card, though, for the 6-flip leaders. All right, that's what I got for you in this review. Next week, I believe we'll get the last 2 leaders, and that will kind of be the most interesting stuff to talk about. And then we'll kind of keep track as to like how the rest of the preview season goes. It's not that many cards left. We're somewhere in the 50s. After next week, it'll probably be somewhere in the mid-20s or maybe 30s. A lot of those cards might come as part of like a card dump at the end or something that content creators will reveal with early pack openings. So we'll keep tabs on how we'll finish up the review series. But yeah, let me know what you think. And until next time, take care.